Before we go to our next song, I'm going to turn the mic over for a second to Michael, who's going to just share a few words and memories about the late, great Michael Brecker. Michael Pedicin Jr., folks.
This could actually take hours. It goes way, way, way back. The first time I met Michael was probably my first year of college, which was here in Philadelphia at the University of the Arts, then called the Philadelphia Musical Academy, actually. And I guess I was probably 18, which makes Michael 15. And his dad brought him in to hear us play, because we were the little guys in town and were making some noise as young college students. And met him, and he was a kid that I could have cared less about at that time. A few years later, all that changed. Kind of flipped itself. And of course, by the time I was maybe 23 or 24, Michael was now 20 or 21 and absolutely playing his butt off at that age as well, and continued to do that throughout his life, as most all of us probably know that are here tonight. And I guess, I mean, I can say so many things about him, but some of the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful early memories were, and this is something that I would like to impart to the young guys here, that I never remember Michael ever being satisfied with anything that he ever played. And before I got to know him really well, I used to think he was just putting me on. And I would go to see him at, I don't know if some of the audience is old enough to remember the Showboat and Bijou that Randy and Michael both played. And he played with Horace Silver then and all. And he would come off the stage after a solo, and we would be saying, God, if I ever played a solo like that, I'd be happy for the rest of my life. And he'd come off and say, man, wasn't that terrible? And I thought that he was really, you know, when I was very young, thought that he was probably just putting us on, but he wasn't. He was never satisfied and always wanted to push himself to the height at which he finally came and enabled him to play such amazing virtuosic saxophone, as well as just being the consummate jazz musician that he was. If any of you haven't experienced Michael Brecker on record or on CD, in addition to every one of Michael's own CD and records that he made with his name, there's one that he did with Herbie Hancock a couple of years back at Massey Hall in Canada, called Directions in Music. And Michael does a, I don't know, maybe an 8 or 9 minute solo saxophone thing on Coltrane's tune called Naima, which I saw Michael do at Carnegie Hall too, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and totally, of course, blew me away. And I remember going down back to his dressing room after he was finished, and he was totally exhausted physically, as if he had just run a marathon, because he stood out there by himself and played the most virtuosic things that a saxophonist can do, forgetting that he was a jazz player. Just the things that he did on the saxophone from the bottom of the instrument to the top of the instrument were just incredibly delicious to all of us that listened and experienced that. So if you haven't checked him out, by all means check him out. And he was just, I guess for the last 25 or 30 years, probably the most influential jazz saxophonist. He certainly isn't the only jazz saxophonist that's meaningful in our world, but he was probably the most influential to all of the guys that are now in their 35, 40 to 50 year range. I mean, everybody wanted to sound like Michael Brecker. And one other cute story about Michael. Years ago, when I was a kid, my dad was a saxophone player too, so my father used to take me to a repairman that unfortunately you guys will never get to experience, but his name was George Sarkis, and he had a little shop on 18th Street, around 18th and Arch, 18th and Cherry, that no one in the world could have ever found anything they left with George, but George always knew where it was. I mean, there were saxophones piled on top of each other, mouthpieces in drawers that looked filthy, but he knew where it all was. And when he closed up shop, I had known him since the time I was probably 3 or 4 years old. And when he closed up shop, which is probably 20 years ago or so, he called me and he said, I've just emptied so many things, and I have these great mouthpieces, one of which I have on tonight, which is one of the original auto-link tenor mouthpieces made. I think it was the 10th one that he made at this model. So he gave me 20 mouthpieces, so that he just gave me as a gift. And I immediately called Michael and said, Michael was of course in New York at that time, and a good friend of ours, Bob Malik, who's younger than both of us, and I said, I'll meet you guys in the city and I'll share the 20 mouthpieces with you. You each get 6 and I get 12. Or 14 now. Anyway, we all shared the mouthpieces and had a great time. So I could go on forever, but he was a wonderful man. I loved him. I love him. I'll never forget him. He's had a great influence on me in many, many ways. As a musician and an artist, we've all been through some tough times in our lives because of what we do and the irresponsibility of our world, I guess, in a sense, to appreciate what we all do and we work so hard at perfecting. So we all go through those troubled times, and although Michael was having his own issues even a couple of years ago, there were a few days where I was deciding whether I still wanted to be a psychologist or really be a tenor player completely again. And he spent hours at a time on the phone with me, counseling me. So I'll never forget a mentor of mine and a dear friend, Michael Brecker.
Thank you so much for sharing.